Many Magic the Gathering players ask the question, can Magic Rarebob do a video deck tech? Today we'll find out. Anyway, hello, it's Magic Rarebob here, and today we're doing a Magic Deck Tech video to do with a new commander from Theros called Kroxa, Titan of Death's Hunger. It's a black and a red for a 6/6 legendary creature, Elder Giant. It has two enter the battlefield effects. The first is when it enters the battlefield, sacrifice it unless it escaped. Its second enter the battlefield effect is whenever Kroxa enters the battlefield or attacks, each opponent discards a card, then each opponent who didn't discard a non-land card this way loses 3 life. The way it's phrased in a strange way is because if an opponent didn't have a card to discard, you wouldn't get the trigger to make them lose 3 life. So what it basically means is if they have no card to discard, they're going to lose 3 life. Its final ability is an escape mechanic, which is a new ability in Theros, which is black, red. Exile 5 other cards from your graveyard. You may cast this card from your graveyard for its escape cost. Okay, so let's get into the nitty gritty. Kroxa, what makes him such a great commander is he's a 2-drop commander, meaning that guaranteed every time on turn 2 to drop him. What also is so great is that the deck is built around a 3 CMC value, meaning that you're going to be able to play lots of different cards or multiple cards in a single turn, allowing you to have explosive turns at any given moment and surprise your opponents. So giving a brief overview of the deck, there are 34 lands, 7 artifacts, 11 enchantments, 8 instances, 18 sorceries, a couple of planeswalkers and 20 creatures. But what does all that mean? Well, let's get into it. So, the nitty-gritty of it is we're going to be making opponents discard cards, we're going to be discarding cards, and everybody's going to be discarding cards. And the packages we're going to build around that are going to be benefits for us predominantly, which is going to be causing pain for the opponents, giving us card draw, extra life, and some really mega value things such as reanimating, and some other sneaky things that I'm going to show you later on. On top of that, we're going to be discussing a little bit of the ramp cards involved in the deck, and then if the opponents are sneaky and they manage to get any of their creatures through, we're going to have targeted removal for them, and board wipe. Right then, straight into the first section, the opponent's discarding cards. So all these cards here are specifically for the opponent to discard. So, first up, Vicious Rumors, a 1-mana sorcery. Vicious Rumor deals 1 damage to each opponent. Each opponent discards a card, then puts the top card of their library into their graveyard. You gain 1 life. So realistically, it's going to be taking out 3 cards for 1 card, maybe even 6 if you count their top deck as well, and you gain a little bit of life. Arterial Flow is the next card, which is 1 black for a sorcery. Each opponent discards 2 cards. If you control a vampire, each opponent loses 2 life and you gain 2 life. So again, you're paying 1 card to get rid of 6 cards, which is really good value. And on top of that, there are 2 vampires in the deck, so you might get a bit of life gain and life loss for the opponents. Into the creatures, we've got a Burglar Rat, which is 1 and a black for a 1/1 rat. When it enters the battlefield, each opponent discards a card. So again, value, we put 1 card down, they all bin a card. Liliana Spectre, 1 black for a 2/1 flying creature, and it has when it enters the battlefield, each opponent discards a card. Same as the rat, you put it down, everyone bins a card. Next up, Lightning Skelemental. It's a 3-drop, black, red for a 6/1 trampling haste creature. When it deals combat damage to a player, that player discards 2 cards. Great value. At the beginning of your end step, sacrifice Lightning Skelemental. Next up, a Planeswalker, Angrath the Flame Chained. 3 black-red for a 4 loyalty Planeswalker. +1 abilities, each opponent discards a card and loses 2 life, which is really good value. Its -3 is gain control of target creature until end of turn. Untap it, it gains haste until end of turn. Sacrifice at the beginning of the next end step if it has a converted mana cost 3 or less. So you can pinch someone else's creature, and then if it's their commander and it's 3-drop, then you can, or less should I say, you can just sacrifice it. Job's a good one. And the win con, if you can actually ever get it to work, is a -8. It says each opponent loses life equal to the number of cards in his or her graveyard. And obviously our entire deck is built around discards, so we should be filling graveyards pretty quickly. Next up is 2 cards that are put into the potential category of discarding for your opponent. First up is Plaguecrafter, 2 and a black for a 3/2 human shaman. Enters the battlefield, each opponent sacrifices a creature or a planeswalker. Each player who can't discards a card. So it's really good because if you can't hit a creature or a planeswalker, you're going to make them bin a card. But if one of the players has got just a planeswalker up or just a big creature up, you're going to take that out as well. Liliana Heretic Healer, 1 black for a 2/3 human cleric, is a legendary creature and she has lifelink. Whenever another non-token creature you control dies, exile Liliana Heretic Healer, then return it to the battlefield transformed under her owner's control. If you do, create a 2/2 black zombie token. So the token's quite nice and the lifelink is, but it's really getting that sacrifice trigger off. Now we obviously have mentioned the Plaguecrafter, the Elemental, and a few other cards already that we can say, and will be later on, that are going to die pretty easily, allowing her to flip over. And when she flips, she returns to the battlefield as a Planeswalker, a 3 loyalty Planeswalker, who has 3 abilities. The first one is a +2. Each player discards a card, which is brilliant for our deck. The minus is a -X, and it says return target non-legendary creature card with converted mana cost X from your graveyard to the battlefield. So again, you could drop anything, a 3-drop or less, or you could always uptick it the first time round and then take something back from your deck. There are plenty of options in this deck that'll work, but you got to remember the key bit, it is non-legendary. And the final bit is a -8. It says you get an emblem with whenever a creature dies, return it to the battlefield under your control at the beginning of the next end step. So that's really good value there. And the reason it's such good value is any of your creatures dying, returning to the battlefield is fantastic anyway, especially with their ETBs. But with Kroxa, it'll do the same again. So he'll die, and on your end step, he'll return to the battlefield again. Value. So after making our opponents discard cards, we have 4 benefit packages to take it one step further. The first of those 4 is the pain for the enemy. First up is Liliana's Caress, which is 1 and a black for an enchantment that says whenever an opponent discards a card, that player loses 2 life. Next up, Megrim, 2 and a black for another enchantment that says whenever an opponent discards a card, Megrim deals 2 damage to them. Bloodchief Ascension, 1 black for an enchantment. At the beginning of each end step, if an opponent lost 2 or more life this turn, you may put a quest counter on Bloodchief Ascension. Whenever a card is put into an opponent's graveyard from anywhere, if Bloodchief Ascension has 3 or more quest counters on it, you may have that player lose 2 life. If you do, you gain 2 life. So this is really easy. You can drop this on turn 1, let other players hit each other, and this will start ticking up the points. As soon as that happens, anything that goes in the bin, they're going to lose 2 life, and you're going to gain 2 life. So when we start making discard happen, we're going to get a lot of life, and they're going to lose a lot of life. We have a creature now, Fell Spectre, 3 and a black for a 1/3. When it enters the battlefield, target opponent discards a card. Whenever an opponent discards a card, that player loses 2 life. Another enchantment, Raider's Wake. It's 3 and a black. Whenever an opponent discards a card, that player loses 2 life. And it also has an ability called Raid. At the beginning of your end step, if you attacked with a creature this turn, target opponent discards a card. And now you're able to see, with all these enchantments on the battlefield, even having 1 or 2 of them ramps up pretty quickly. But if you end up with 4 or 5 of them, people are going to be taking 8 or 10 damage a turn each time they just bin a simple card. So while our opponents are discarding cards, we're going to make some other benefits. First up is Siphon Mind, 3 and a black for a sorcery. Each other player discards a card. You draw a card for each card discarded this way. Generally, you'll be paying 4 mana and you're going to be drawing 3 cards and making them bin 3 cards, which seems pretty good to me. Next, we're looking to keep our draw engine going with Geth's Grimoire, 4 mana for an artifact that says whenever an opponent discards a card from his or her hand, you draw a card. And we have so many ways of discarding cards, this has got such good value. Next up is a creature called Sangromancer, which is 2 black for a 3/3 Vampire Shaman. Whenever a creature an opponent controls dies, you may gain 3 life, and whenever an opponent discards a card, you may gain 3 life. We're going to need that life gain because we're going to draw a lot of hate. Now for one of the most amazing cards in the deck, Waste Not. 1 and a black for an enchantment. Whenever an opponent discards a creature card, you get a 2/2 black zombie. Whenever an opponent discards a land card, you get 2 black mana to your mana pool, and whenever an opponent discards a non-creature, non-land card, you draw a card. So effectively, as long as they're discarding something, you're going to get some sort of value out of it. Next up, to keep the value train running, is Asylum Visitor, 1 and a black for a vampire wizard, which is 3/1. At the beginning of each player's upkeep, if that player has no cards in hand, you draw a card and you lose 1 life. And you can cast it for madness. This is fantastic because it's going to go on for everyone's up. Next up, to keep the pain going, is Davriel, Rogue Shadow Maid, Planeswalker for 2 and a black for a 3 loyalty. At the beginning of each opponent's upkeep, if that player has 1 or fewer cards in hand, Davriel Rogue Shadow deals 2 damage to them. And most of the time, our opponents are going to have very little cards in hand. -1, target player discards a card. Next up is another great enchantment for this deck called Gibbering Descent. 4 black for an enchantment that says at the beginning of each player's upkeep, that player loses 1 life and discards a card. It comes with a very small drawback, which is called Hellbent, which says skip your upkeep step if you have no cards in hand. Now obviously, skipping your upkeep and not untapping your mana is terrible. However, the chance of this happening is extremely low, and there are plenty of ways we can get around this without having to cast it. It also has the ability of Madness, paying 2 black. So if we're discarding this away, we can discard it, pay its Madness cost at instant speed, and we get value. Rather than having to pay 6, we're paying 4 mana. And our last enchantment in the pain slot has got a fitting name, Painful Quandary. 3 black for an enchantment. Whenever an opponent casts a spell, that player loses 5 life unless he or she discards a card. What's amazing about this is people are casting cards all the time. So if they're in top deck mode, they've got to decide, do I want to cast this spell and lose 5 life, or do I want to discard a card? Either way, it's definitely a painful quandary. Continuing with value cards for the deck, first up is an enchantment, Underworld Dreams, black, and it says whenever an opponent draws a card, Underworld Dreams deals 1 damage to that player. This is a really good card in the deck, just generally sat there pinging opponents left, right and centre, and then when we start discarding cards, redrawing cards, or milling through people's hands, they're going to take a lot of points of damage very quickly. The next up is Obnixilis Unshackled, 4 black for a legendary creature demon, 4/4, flying and trample. Whenever an opponent searches his or her library, that player sacrifices a creature and loses 10 life. Whenever another creature dies, put a 1/1 counter onto Obnixilis Unshackled. So this is a really good key piece for our deck. First of all, we're able to reanimate this potentially, but even if we get it out on turn 6, just that value of whenever people are searching. So anytime they try and tutor, anytime they try and search for lands to replay them, they're going to lose 10 life and lose a creature, which is really good. On top of that, when that creature dies, we get a 1/1 counter on him, so he's going to get bigger with that trampling effect. But also, if other people are killing other creatures on the battlefield, this is going to get bigger as well. Get pumped up, swing for the face. Next up is a card I've been trying to fit into many of my commander decks, and I finally feel like it's found a home. Gifra's Ori. It's 4 mana for an artifact. Each player may play an additional land on each of his or her turns. At the beginning of each player's upkeep, if that player has no cards in hand, that player draws 3 cards. So let's now walk through the value of this card. The first ability allows us to play extra land drops, being able to get ramp, which is very difficult in red and black. Also what happens is when we can play those extra lands per turn, hopefully that should thin the amount of cards we've got in hand, allowing that bottom ability to trigger for ourselves. So, the downside of this card, obviously, is it gives our opponents ramp. However, the good thing about that is, what that means is they're going to play extra lands from their hand and leave key pieces in their hand, which we can then discard. If, however, they are lucky or fortunate enough to be able to play multiple lands and empty their entire hand, well, this is a win-win for us as well. Yes, they're going to draw 3 cards on their next upkeep, but what that means is they're going to have no cards to interact with us on our turn. If, when they do get those 3 cards and refill their hand again, we now have discard fodder to aim at. The worst case scenario that can happen with this card is each player ramp has no cards left in their hand and draws 3 cards a turn. And if that's the case, we still have gained a lot of benefit for 4 mana. Next up, cards we can get value by discarding them. First up is Squee Goblin Nabob. 2 and a red for a 1/1 legendary creature goblin. At the beginning of your upkeep, you may return Squee Goblin Nabob from your graveyard to your hand. So keep throwing it in the bin and get value over and over again. Next up, Bag of Holding. 1 mana for an artifact. Whenever you discard a card, exile that card from your graveyard. 2 mana. Tap it, draw a card, then discard a card. A nice little loot ability to filter through. Number 4, tap it, sacrifice Bag of Holding, return all cards exiled with Bag of Holding to their owner's hands. Value City. Another good value card is Bone Miser. 4 and a black for a 4/4 creature zombie wizard. Same text as Waste Not, except it's reversed. Whenever you discard a creature card, you get a 2/2 black zombie. Whenever you discard a land, you get 2 black mana. And whenever you discard a non-creature, non-land card, draw a card. Next up, keeping the pain train running for our opponents, is Glinthorn Buccaneer. 1 red for a creature minotaur 2/4 with haste. Whenever you discard a card, this creature will deal 1 damage to each opponent. On top of that, it's got 1 and a red, discard a card, draw a card. Activate this ability only if your Glinthorn Buccaneer is attacking. Really good again. We start discarding cards, we're pinging them alongside of our other ping effects. Next up, some draw effects here. Faithless Looting. 1 red for a sorcery, draw 2 cards, then discard 2 cards. It can also be flashback for 2 and a red, or you can cast it from your graveyard. Thrill of Possibility. 1 and a red for an instant. As an additional cost to cast a spell, discard a card, then draw 2 cards. Tormenting Voices is exactly the same as Thrill of Possibilities, although it's at sorcery speed this time. It's 1 and a red. As an initial cost to cast a spell, discard a card, draw 2 cards. Another draw card is Azar's Oddsmaker. 1 black red for a creature Azar Warrior 3/3. At the beginning of combat on your turn, you may discard a card. If you do, choose a creature. When that creature deals combat damage to a player, this turn you draw 2 cards. So if you've got no cards to discard, that's fine, you can still swing in, but if you do, you can get some value out of it and look for the right kind of hit to get those extra cards. The final one for huge explosive turns, based on all the cards we've mentioned before, is 1 with nothing for 1 black mana. An instant, discard your hand. Pick the right moment in time, play this and get maximum value for just 1 black mana. Next up, into the Reanimator package. First up is Demonic Tutor. 1 and a black for a sorcery. Search your library for a card and put that card into your hand, then shuffle your library. So this is perfect for reanimating, but also getting any single card we want from our deck direct into our hand for those key moments. Next up is Buried Alive. 2 and a black for a sorcery. Search your library for up to 3 creature cards, put them into your graveyard, then shuffle your library. Again, perfect setup for reanimating. Next up, Unearth. 1 black mana for a sorcery. Return target creature card with converted mana cost 3 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield, and it has also the ability of cycling 2 generic mana, discard this card, draw a card. So this has got the cycling ability, which is just really handy. Binning a card, drawing a card, which with our other values out there can be helpful. But the key bit is returning a 3 CMC creature. Well, guess what? Our commander is a 3 CMC or less creature, along with a number of other ones we have in the deck. Another utility card that can be used in a variety of ways, along with reanimating, is Kulgama's Command. 1 black red for an instant. Choose 2. Return target creature card from your graveyard to your hand. So that's any creature you want. 2. Target player discards a card. There's your discard mechanic. 3. Destroy target artifact. Some nice removal. And finally, Kulgama's Command deals 2 damage to target creature or player. You're probably not going to need that, but it might occasionally come in clutch. But generally, the other 3 abilities are really top notch. Continuing with the Reanimator package, we've got Call to the Netherworld. 1 black mana for a sorcery. Return target black creature card from your graveyard to your hand. That's really good value. Oh, it's got Madness as well. If you discard this card, discard it into exile. When you do, cast it for its Madness cost, or put it into your graveyard. Well, guess what? The Madness cost? 0. So you get that creature back, bin a card, get a creature back to your hand. Marvellous. Animate Dead. 1 and a black for an enchantment aura. Enchantment creature card in a graveyard. When Animate Dead enters the battlefield, if it's on the battlefield, it loses enchant creature card in a graveyard and gains enchant creature put onto the battlefield with Animate Dead. Return enchant creature card to the battlefield under your control and attach Animate Dead to it. When Animate Dead leaves the battlefield, that creature controller sacrifices it. Enchant creature gets -1 attack. So, with all that reading, the simple answer is basically you play this, get anything out of the graveyard, and it comes onto the battlefield directly. And it doesn't matter how big or small the creature is. And finally, Gruesome Menagerie. 3 black for a sorcery. Choose a creature card with converted mana cost 1 in your graveyard, then do the same for a creature with 2 and 3. Return those cards to the battlefield. Now I will note that this deck has no 1-drops, but this will return a 2 and a 3-drop creature for you, and don't worry about the first clause. If you don't have a 1-drop, then it will still resolve. However, if you tweak the deck, you might be able to find some 1-drops that will. Now into the final section of discard. Everybody discards. Woohoo! First up is Gaia Reach Sanitarium. It's a legendary land that taps for a generic mana, but it also has 2 tap. Each player draws a card, then discards a card. So it's a great way of looting for ourselves, and everyone else will be drawing a card and discarding a card. That's really handy with our pain effects we've got in play. Wheel of Fate, a sorcery that has suspend 4. You pay 1 and a red. Rather than cast this card from your hand, pay 1 and a red and exile it with 4 time counters on it. At the beginning of your upkeep, remove a time counter. When the last is removed, cast it without paying its mana cost. Each player discards his or her hand, then draw 7 cards. So that you can set it up where you're going to clear, maybe even on turn 2, put it down, and you know in 4 turns, you're setting up for everyone going to discard the hand and redraw a hand. So any of your ping effects, any of your draw, any really cool synergy cards, get them in play now. Mindrake, 2 and a black for a sorcery. Target player discards 2 cards. But it's also got this wonderful ability called Overload. Now, Overload normally costs a lot more, but in this case, it's reduced. It says 1 and a black. You may cast this spell for its Overload cost. If you do, change text by replacing all instances of target with each. So basically, everyone bins 2 cards. Plenty of synergy with this deck. Next up, Magnus of the Wheel, 2 and a red for a 3/3 creature human wizard. Pay 1 and a red, tap it, sacrifice Magnus of the Wheel. Each player discards their hand, then draw 7 cards. Dark Deal, 2 and a black for a sorcery. Each player discards all the cards in his or her hand, then draws that many cards -1. Legendary creature now, Rankle, Master of Pranks. 2 black for a 3/3 fairy rogue. It has flying and haste. Whenever Rankle, Master of Pranks deals combat damage to a player, choose any number. You can either pick each player discards a card, each player loses 1 life and draws a card, and each player sacrifices a creature. Those 2 first abilities are amazing in this deck, and a sacrifice a creature is also quite handy. Mind Slicer, 2 black for a creature horror 4/3. When Mind Slicer is put into a graveyard from play, each player discards his or her hand. So if you had played Mind Slicer and then the turn after play Rankle, you could actually sacrifice it and make everyone bin all their hands. Brilliant. And the last one, Awaken the Erstwhile, 3 black for a sorcery. Each player discards all cards in their hand, then creates that many 2/2 black zombie tokens. Perfect. Now after all that discard, if any of our opponents can sneak anything onto the battlefield, we've got ways to remove it. First up is Fatal Push. 1 black mana. Instant. Destroy target creature if it has converted mana cost 2 or less. It also has Revolt. Destroy that creature if it has a converted mana cost 4 or less instead if a permanent you control left the battlefield this turn. Terminate. Black and a red. Instant. Destroy target creature. It can't be regenerated. Bedevil. Black red. Instant. Destroy target artifact, creature or planeswalker. Handy. Chaos Warp. 2 and a red. Instant. The owner of target permanent shuffles it into their owner's library, then reveals the top card of their library. Permanent card, they put it onto the battlefield. Pretty good for us. Really, that's our only way of removing enchantments and tricky artifacts. So it's a pretty handy card. A few board wipes here. Force of Despair. 1 black. If it's not your turn, you may exile a black card from your hand rather than pay its mana cost. Destroy all creatures that enter the battlefield this turn. So if anyone has any explosive plays, time to drop this. Now for a big boy. Malgifor. 2 black, red. Legendary creature, demon, dragon. 6/6, flying. When Malgifor enters the battlefield, discard your hand. Each opponent sacrifices a creature for each card discarded this way. Last one standing. 1 black and a red. Choose a creature at random, then destroy the rest. And finally, my favourite card. Fraying Omnipotence. 3 black for a sorcery. Each player loses half their life, then discards half the cards in their hand, then sacrifices half the creature they control, rounded up each time. Finally, into the last section, the synergies and win cons of the deck. All 7 of these next cards all combine with each other in all unique and wonderful ways, and I'll try and explain as many of them as I can. First up, Mana Geyser. 3 red for a sorcery. Add to your mana pool for each tapped land your opponents control. Drop it on turn 5, and if everyone's tapped out, that's 15 mana bag. Underworld Breach. 1 and a red for an enchantment. Each non-land card in your graveyard has escape. The escape cost is equal to the card's converted mana cost plus exile 3 other cards from your graveyard. At the beginning of the end step, sacrifice Underworld Breach. So what you could do is cast Mana Geyser. If you've got a couple of cards in the bin, use your Underworld Breach and then exile 3 cards and play Mana Geyser again, potentially getting up to in the region of 30 mana. Moving on from there is Burning Inquiry, which is just a good card on its own, which is 1 red for a sorcery. Each player draws 3 cards and then discards 3 cards at random. random. So with any of our ping packages or bonus packages, this is great. However, combining Mana Geyser with all that mana and Underworld Breach, we can then use all that mana to keep casting Burning Inquiry over and over and over again. Because the 3 cards that we bin, we can then use them to exile to keep it going, which with any of our mentioned earlier, any of the synergy packages works brilliant. Another great card to help win out the game is Felden of the Third Path. 1 red for a legendary creature, Human Artificer, who's a 2/3. And for 2 and a red, you can tap him, create a token that's a copy of a target creature in your graveyard, except if it's an artifact in addition to its other types. It gains haste, sacrifice at the beginning of the next end step. So any of the creatures we've used already, we can put 3 mana into him, create 1 token copy, which is pretty good. Also, he's a great little reanimator for all those cards that we've binned already. Next up, Sundial of the Infinite. 2 mana for an artifact, pay 1, tap it, end the turn. Activate this ability only during your turn. Exile all spells and abilities on the stack, discard down to your maximum hand size until the end of turn, damage wears off, and this turn, and until end of turn effects end. We can use this to synergize well with a number of different cards in our deck already, one of them which can be our commander, where you can pay 1, tap it, and then after doing the first ETB trigger of when he enters and makes everyone discard a card, you can then activate this to keep him on the battlefield without having to sacrifice him. You can also use this with Underworld Breach to keep it on the battlefield so that you can keep using it on everyone else's turns, and we can also use it with the creatures that bounce through with Felden and or Mirror. Next card, Mirror. 5 in a red for an enchantment. Whenever a non-token creature enters the battlefield under your control, flip a coin until you lose a flip. Each flip you won, create a token that's a copy of that creature. Those tokens gain haste, exile them at the beginning of the next M step. So this is really good. Any of the creatures in our deck we can use, except for the legendary ones. However, what will happen is when the legendary ones enter, they'll have to sack the other ones. But even with our commander, you could end up with, I don't know, an infinite amount, but more likely 2 or 3, and then you can sack each of those ones off, keep the original, and you're still going to get 3 discards off it. But more importantly, you can use this with other better cards, one of which is Dragon Mage. Dragon Mage is 5 red, creature, dragon, wizard, 5/5, flying. Whenever Dragon Mage deals combat damage to a player, each player discards their hand and then draws 7 cards. If this lands and you get a couple of them, then you can swing them into an opponent, hopefully discarding their hand and redrawing 7 cards. Any of the ping effects, any of the benefit packages again, we can get massive amounts, but also we could end up with hundreds of flying dragons going in for the kill. And now bringing the video to a close, let's look over the artifacts and land base. First up, Soul Ring, 1 mana, taps for 2 generic mana. Arcane Signet, 2 mana, taps for 1 mana of any colour of your commander's identity, so red or black. And Hedron Archive, 4 mana, artifact that taps for 2 generic mana, and then for 2 generic mana you can tap it, sacrifice it, and draw 2 cards. Then we've got 2 lands, Forgotten Cave and Barren Moor. Each of them enter the battlefield tap, and each of them provides either a black or a red mana, and you can cycle each of them for a black or a red, discard this card, draw a card. Really handy. We've got Ash Barrens, which comes in untap, tap it, add 1 generic mana, or for basic land cycling, you can pay 1 generic mana, discard this from your hand, search your library for a basic land card, reveal it, and put it into your hand. So if you've missed the important colour you need, you can go and fix it there. Canyon Slough, which is a land swamp mountain, it comes into battlefield tapped, but it does have cycling, where you can pay 2 generic mana, discard this card, and draw a card. Temple of Malice, enter battlefield tap, provide black or red, but it gives you a scry effect for 1. Evolving Wilds and Terramorphic Expanse do the same thing. Come into the battlefield untapped, you tap them, sacrifice them, go and find a basic land colour of the colour you want that comes in tapped. Command Tower, add 1 mana of your colour to your man's colour identity. Exotic Orchard, add 1 mana of any colour that a land an opponent controlled would produce, which most of the time someone's going to be producing red and black. And finally, Graven Cairns, which taps for a colourless, and also you can pay either red or black into it, and it'll tap for double black, black red, or red red. To close out the mana base, 6 mountains and 16 swamps. Now to close out the video, I'd like to say thank you very much for getting to the end of the video. I hope you enjoyed Kroxa Titan of Death's Hunger, and you build it either in the same way or your own unique way based on what I've given you ideas for. I'd like to thank the 6 subscribers we have at the moment. Hopefully that number can increase in time. I'd like to say a big thank you to my partner Emma for all the editing that she's done today. Thank you very much. Take it easy out there. Stay safe. I'll speak to you again soon.